My name is Jonathan Pearlman. I'm the editor of the Jewish Quarterly. I'd like to start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land, the Wurundjeri and Bunurong people of the Kulin Nation, and thank everyone for coming out early on a Sunday morning. We can all see Jan. Jan cannot see us at the moment. We're trying to arrange some vision, but we can certainly hear him. So, Jan, I'll introduce you, but good morning, and just so you know, you're talking to a hall of people in Melbourne.
Well, nice to hear you, and nice to meet you.
So Jan is speaking to us from Canada. Jan Grabowski is a Polish-Canadian professor of history at the University of Ottawa. His books include Hunt for the Jews, Night Without End, and On Duty, the role of the Polish Blue and criminal police in the Holocaust. And Jan, some people may have heard Jan, may have heard of Jan because he was involved in a famous lawsuit where he was, aside from also being subject to personal assaults for the work that he's done, he and a colleague were the subject of a lawsuit in Poland, which made international news and involved a defamation, a lawsuit where he and a colleague were sued for the history that they were writing about the complicity of the Poles in the Holocaust. So we'll hear a little bit more about that case. But just to introduce Jewish Quarterly and this issue, Jewish Quarterly is a publication with a long history. It's more than 70 years old. It was originally a British publication. It's now published by Maury Schwartz, who's here this morning. Morning, Maury. So it's based in Australia, but it's now an international publication. And each issue deals with the most important topic of the day to the Jewish people. As you'll see this morning, the topic of this issue, Whitewash, certainly fits in that category. What this issue looks at is a disturbing phenomenon that is going on in Poland and that has been going on for some years, and involves, as Jan describes it in the essay, a phenomenon that in some ways is more dangerous and insidious than Holocaust denialism. And he refers to it as Holocaust distortion. And what this involves is using the entire organs of the state. It's occurring across Eastern Europe, but Poland is the most egregious example, and particularly because Poland was, as Jan says, the ground zero of the Holocaust. It involves using the organs of the state to admit that 6 million Jews died, but completely deny the role of the Polish nation and the Polish people in the Holocaust, and to place the entire blame on the Nazis. So that's the phenomenon that we'll be exploring this morning. And just to give you an idea of how pervasive this has become and the effect of it, some statistics that Jan includes in the piece. A poll in 2021, a survey, found that 71% of Polish people believe that during World War II, Poles suffered as much as or more than the Jews. Okay, now let's remember that there were 3 million Jews in Poland who were killed, and only 1% of them survived. Another statistic he quotes is that the 84% of Poles, again this was in 2021, were convinced that their ancestors under the occupation helped the Jews as much as they could, which is laughable really, given the extent of the destruction of Polish Jewry. So that gives you a sense of the phenomenon that we'll be discussing this morning, and Jan is really the ideal person to do it. And Jan, where I'd like to start the discussion is just to give a sense, so that we can have a sense of a couple of the essay deals with many examples of the ways in which the Polish government and the Polish state have been distorting their own history. But we'll start with some concrete examples of that, Jan. And I thought if we could start with the events you describe in your essay as Polonizing Treblinka. Can you start by explaining what happened in 2021, so this is very recent, with the unveiling of the monument to Jan Maletka at Treblinka?
Right. Well, John, first of all, thank you very much for this introduction. And I can't see you, but my heart goes out to Melbourne. I have been there several years ago, and I fondly remember my stay in your fair city. Now, turning to your question, imagine Treblinka, unlike Auschwitz, is not perhaps as well known as Auschwitz, but still, Treblinka is a place it's the second largest Jewish cemetery in the world. Close to 900,000 Jews have been murdered between the summer of 1942 and the early fall of 1943 in this very, very small location in remote eastern Poland. Now, in November 2021, as Jonathan mentioned, Polish government decided to do something fairly unprecedented. I mean, the violations of memory of the Holocaust are so many in Poland that it's really, the list is long, and I would be unable to go through most of it. But this, what happened in Treblinka in November 21, was something that really shook me to the core. And at this time, I was actually, I was delivering a speech at Leiden University in Leiden in Holland. And I had this keynote to deliver. And I had to change everything because I heard in the evening about this outrage in Treblinka. So what happened? Well, basically, this Treblinka in Poland is one of very few areas which is devoted only and solely to the memory of the Holocaust, to the Jewish tragedy, to the Jewish catastrophe. Now, for years now, the Polish authorities were trying somehow to appropriate part of the glory of suffering, if you will. So what they did in November 21, they unveiled on the station of Treblinka railway station, the place where 900,000 of Jews transited through on their last way to the gas chambers at the nearby 3 kilometers distant death camp. So they decided to unveil a monument devoted to the memory of a young Polish railway worker, Jan Maletka, who allegedly delivered water to these Jews waiting on that station from the goodness of his heart. Well, the thing is that we have enormous historical evidence describing that indeed water has been given by the Poles to the Jews at that station, but at outrageous prices. We have not even one credible proof that anyone delivered water to these heavily guarded death trains for any other reason than greed. In any case, they unveiled the monument to Polish glory, to Polish, let's say, suffering and Polish sacrifice, and to 900,000 dead Jews. So this for me was something I really could not tolerate or take. I mean, this brazen attempt at appropriate the Jewish suffering for the needs of Polish national mythology which is based on the idea that Polish society was innocent during the war, was something that I think is much more dangerous than Holocaust, as Jonathan mentioned, as Holocaust denial, because this is something much more difficult to combat, especially when it's combined with the powerful role of a hostile state, in this case, Polish state, which lent its resources, it is powerful resources, to this kind of gross distortion of the memory of the Holocaust. And examples are, many. In the vicinity of Treblinka today, you have 10 monuments to Poles, allegedly or for real, who have sacrificed their lives for the welfare of the Jews. So basically, what you see is a kind of memorial attack, memorial offensive, which is visible at Treblinka, which is visible even more so in Auschwitz, and practically each and every site of Jewish catastrophe. And all of them practically are on Polish territory. If you look at the death camps that the Germans built, all of them have been built on pre-war Polish territory, which imposes on Polish authorities or forces the Polish authorities to preserve this, makes them custodians of this Jewish catastrophe. And what I try to argue in my essay is that not only they fail to do the job, but they do something very hostile towards the memory of the Holocaust. So, Jonathan, over to you.
Thanks, Jan. Can you then, we've just been discussing Treblinka, can you explain the difference between Treblinka 1 and 2 and Auschwitz 1 and 2, and again explain how Poland sort of exploits that difference?
So for example, if you build a monument, one monument as they built at the railway station, a former railway station at Treblinka, to this allegedly noble Pole, and there is no credible corroborating evidence of his nobility. In any case, this monument is not enough to, let's say, distort the image of Treblinka. It's a tool, but it's not a powerful enough tool. But most of us scholars of the Holocaust and most of the, let's say, visiting public know that actually in Treblinka there were two camps. One was so-called hard labor camp, Treblinka 1, which was built by the Germans in the fall of 1940, summer fall of 1941. And this was basically a very cruel, very harsh, awful labor camp where people were Poles and Jews actually were brought to work in a quarry in horrible conditions. So this is Treblinka 1. And there you have about, from what we know, about 300 ethnic Polish victims and about 10,000 Jewish victims. So basically, Treblinka 1 was a hard labor camp to which the Jews were sent to die and to which Poles were usually sent for minor or major offenses against the occupation rules. And after serving their time, they were usually released. As I mentioned, 300 of them were dead, but 10,000 Jews were dead. All of them practically who went into Treblinka 1 were killed. Now, next, 2 miles away, in the summer of 1942, the Germans built Treblinka 2, and this is the notorious death camp where 900,000 Jews have been put to death. So what happens in Poland nowadays is an attempt, I would say very successful attempt, to blend the history of these two camps together, basically saying Treblinka 1 is Polish Treblinka because there were Polish victims. That's true. And then you put it together with Treblinka 2 and you blend these histories together. Basically, you have common Polish and Jewish suffering experience. Actually, when you go today to the field of Treblinka 1, you will not find, I believe, even one trace of Jewish suffering, which was overwhelming. It has become so-called in Poland, nasza Treblinka, our Treblinka. So you blend these two traditions together and you appropriate the Jewish catastrophe for the needs of your own national mythology. Poles were the victims of the Holocaust, which is, of course, a lie. Nevertheless, it flies on this particular part of mythology. Now, if you look at Auschwitz, exactly the same thing. Auschwitz is, there are basically two worlds in Auschwitz. One is the concentration camp that you know so well from the notorious inscription, Arbeit macht frei, work makes you free. This is the concentration camp, so-called Konzentrationslager or concentration camp, which was basically a place of horrifying conditions when so many people were put to death. But putting people to death was not the objective of Auschwitz I. Auschwitz II, that's Birkenau, is a different story. So while work, horrible, grueling, full of terror, with tens of thousands of dead people, was the essence of concentration camp Auschwitz I, the essence of extermination camp Auschwitz II, which has been created in 1942, basically, is death. So it's not the byproduct of the system, it's the goal of the system itself. So what you do now in Poland, what you have those, Jonathan quoted some of these unbelievable statistics that for 71% of Poles today believe that their nation suffered as badly or more than the Jews. This is based in part on this blending on Auschwitz I, Auschwitz II. It's our Auschwitz. Now, I described this in much detail in my essay, how these two traditions were confused on purpose, mixed together, and how today, for instance, in this large nation that Poland is, this consensus seems to build that, Auschwitz was our Auschwitz, that basically it's not associated with the Jews as much as with Polish suffering. So the ways in which this appropriation of Jewish suffering advances, supported by huge resources of the Polish state, is quite extraordinary. And what is actually very frustrating is the further we are distant from the event itself, the easier it is, of course, to manipulate this message, the narrative. And so this is why I say constantly that this is Holocaust distortion. Distortion meaning that at the bottom of it there is some truth. Yes, Poles and the French people and Yugoslavians, all of them were put to death at Auschwitz I. But the situation of the Jews was fundamentally different. The only ethnic group that was targeted by so-called politics of extermination by the German Reich were the Jews. And this becomes easily forgotten. I mean, in Polish history, starting in 1960s, even before, a very clear attempt has been done in order to confuse the issue of concentration camps and extermination camps. And this was a successful attempt. And you can see, and I argue this in my essay or book, I hope convincingly, but this is being picked up by other nations too, European nations. So basically transforming Holocaust into a feel-good narrative of our own sacrifice, saving the Jews, and so on. Jonathan, I believe I should allow you to ask further questions.
Thanks. Can you talk a little bit more about the narrative? We'll talk about the use of the resources of the state soon, but what are the messages that Poland is trying to give, or the Polish state is trying to give about the Holocaust, about history? What historical facts is it trying to distort? And what messages is it instead trying to present?
Right. So if you look up any at any time websites of the Polish Ministry of Foreign Affairs or the President's office, you will see that there is a tremendous drive to underline the number of Polish righteous. Now, righteous were the people, Gentiles, who helped the Jews during the Holocaust for altruistic reasons and so on and so forth. And in Poland, there has been a whole now industry, state-owned, state-fueled, let's say, but also with support of NGOs, in order to transform the attitudes of the Polish society or to present the attitudes of the Polish society during the war as basically helping the Jews being one of the most important parts of national, let's say, ethos and national activity, which flies in the face of every single independent historical research you can find. Now, as Jonathan mentioned in the beginning, we have to understand that out of 3 million Polish Jews who had the misfortune of finding themselves under the German occupation, and here I am not including 250,000 of Jews who fled to the Soviet Union, who never saw the Soviet the Nazi troops. So if you look at the 3 million Polish Jews who had this misfortune, about 30,000 lived to see the liberation in 1944, 1945, which gives you this average of 1% survival rate, which is as horrifyingly efficient as you can possibly imagine. So this drive of the Polish authorities to present Polish society as unified in its desire to save their Jewish neighbors is one of these fallacies which is being pushed very hardly, and not only by the nationalists who are in power in Poland between 2015 and last year, but it's actually a common trait when you look at the publications and exhibitions, traveling exhibitions and stationary ones, museums. All of this is a part of state narrative. The second one is to say basically that all the blame goes to Germans. Now, the thing is that we as scholars of the Holocaust, we know that each and every European nation under German occupation, and even without German occupation, had something to do with, had some kind of involvement in the Holocaust. It might be on a larger scale, on a smaller scale. Nevertheless, no one remained innocent. Now, in Poland, the tradition is now to flatly deny. In my essay, I try to present the facts, basically in terms of murdering or denouncing hidden Jews or Jews in hiding to the authorities. Ethnic Poles are probably responsible for more than 200,000 Jewish deaths. 200,000 is a lot of people. It's a lot of people who had a fighting chance to survive. They went into hiding. They actually perhaps could have made it. They didn't. So these are the facts which are contested hotly in a very hostile way. Then you have, of course, the legislation. But basically speaking, what you see in Poland, and for decades, but now it perhaps became even more clear, is an attempt to turn around the historical narrative and to bury the facts which go against the national myths, national mythology. And there's more of them, of course. But this kind of Holocaust being transformed into a feel-good legend is something that I find personally very pernicious. So basically what the Polish authorities and a large part of the Polish society agree here with the authorities is basically to overstress the degree of own help given to the dying Jews, while at the same time denying or hiding any evidence which would point to the involvement of the Polish fragments of the Polish society in the German genocidal project. We have to remember that, as I mentioned, every single European society was tainted. The German genocidal project was very much open-ended. It invited people to introduce themselves, to somehow get involved. And people did, for a variety of reasons: ideological, financial, greed, religious, you name it. But it was not surprising that in Poland, which held the largest Jewish population in pre-war Europe, in Poland, where actually the politics of terror were at its highest, that these attitudes demonstrated themselves with particular, let's say, flair or visibility. Jonathan, over to you.
You in the essay, you talk about some of the sort of tools, narrative tools, that have been used to distort the history, and you give them names, and I just wonder if you can explain two of them, two of the sort of tools that you describe in the essay. One is the righteous defence, and the other one is Holocaust envy. Can you just quickly explain what those two phenomena are?
Okay. Well, it sounds very awful, actually. I will start with Holocaust envy. I mean, how can you envy anyone Holocaust, right? The thing is that Holocaust in the years, let's say during last 25, I would say 30 perhaps years, has become this universal benchmark of human evil. And it has a certain panache, the kind of enormous suffering which cannot be overshadowed, which bestows upon you, in this case, Jewish people, this honor of ultimate victim. And not surprisingly, there is this Holocaust envy, meaning we would like to suffer, let's say, portray ourselves as people who suffered equally or more. You can see it in the case of Holodomor, of the famine in Ukraine, where official drive was to make it more than 6 million, the magic figure. Now, in Poland, it was actually very interesting, and the documents came to light a few years ago. As some of you can know, that according to official counts, during World War II, 3 million Polish Jews have been put to death, and 3 million ethnic Poles were killed too. Now, these equal numbers have nothing to do with historical research, with historical accuracy. They have all to do with so-called Holocaust envy. So now imagine you are now in late 1945, when Polish official circles start and then finish counting the dead. It took a few months. But at the end of 1945, the numbers were in, and this official commission reported that 3 million Polish Jews, there was no question here, were dead, had been murdered, and 1.8 million ethnic Poles shared this sad fate. And then the communist authorities intervened, in the person of Jakub Berman, who was the chief of Polish secret police, a communist, but also a Jew, but first and foremost a communist. And he said that it cannot be. There is no way that Polish masses will accept the fact that their suffering was so much less. Well, 1.8 million is nothing to talk about, one would say, but it's a horrifying number, but it's not 3 million. So by fiat of their authority, the communists decided that the numbers will be equal, 3 million each. And this number has been declared officially in 1946, and it still is repeated by everybody, starting from Polish president all the way down to most of historians. So this is a power of this Holocaust envy that is actually deeply entrenched in Polish national mythology. Once again, historical mythology. Our suffering is as great as Jewish suffering. Now, as far as the righteous defense is concerned, this is something which I found very unpleasant. As I mentioned before, attempts have been made to present the righteous, people who dared to save the Jews during the war, sometimes with success, sometimes usually without success, as a default situation, as a default position of the entire Polish nation. Which you have once again Polish president, prime minister, ministers delivering speeches in which they quote numbers of millions of Poles saving the Jews. I mean, I am not inventing these numbers. You can Google it. It is absolutely appalling. It has nothing to do with historical reality. But the thing is that the righteous are being used to diffuse any kind of discussion regarding the complicity and the implication of fragments of Polish society in the Holocaust. The moment you present your results of your research, you are being confronted with the righteous, but we Poles, have the largest number of Yad Vashem awarded medals, so-called olive trees, of the righteous of among the nations, which is true. But given the size of Jewish Polish population, it's also not very surprising. Now, the thing is that the celebrations, constant, unending celebrations of I call it celebration of own virtue, there is actually a national day in March, a national day of commemoration of Poles saving Jews. It has become a platform for the right-leaning and the left-leaning Polish politicians meet together in defense of the so-called good name of the Polish nation. It is why I find it absolutely unpalatable. I believe that these people, the courageous Poles who were saving the Jews, should be recognized. They should, of course, but not now. Definitely not now. And one of the things I write in my essay is that
Jan,
before,
can you
yes,
just on that point, I just wonder if you can just discuss the call by name project that you discuss in your essay.
the which one? Sorry.
The call by name project.
Oh yeah. Well, called by name is this is basically part of this righteous defense. Is a project which has been initiated by one of the institutions of the Polish state. It's called the Pilecki Institute, and what they do is basically they move around the country and they erect monuments like the one that I described in Treblinka, devoted to the memory of Jan Maletka, who, according to them, not to any serious historian, has been trying to save the Jews and paid ultimate price with his life. So what they do is they basically go out and they try to multiply here the research about Poles who were killed for trying to save the Jews. Now, some of them are legitimate, some of them are not. Close to Treblinka, on the other side of Buk River, they called by the name program actually recognized the aunt of the former director of Pilecki Institute, who really wanted to see her aunt recognized, but once again without a shred of credible evidence. So all of this falls into this line of stressing our own nobility. And there are more programs like this, actually. If you look at the programs espoused and financed by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, by different museums, most of all, there are the museums which somehow build up this myth are now so numerous I couldn't start enumerating them even from the beginning.
Yes, to what extent is this a state-run project?
Well, the thing is that it's hard to say where the state ends and where the private NGO, let's say, or private interests begin, since much of this NGO is driven by the monies of the state as well. But one thing is quite certain is that this kind of memory abuse or memory violation of the memory of commemoration of the Holocaust is an area where you find national unity in Poland in triumph. Once again, you can find the people who are vicious nationalists, and you can find people who are far left-leaning political persuasion, who here at this stage come together because they say they defend the good name of the nation. They defend also something they call the Polish reason of the state. It's one of the most dangerous propositions, but nevertheless, if you look at the legislation which swept through the Polish parliament over the last few years, you can see this pernicious pattern of outrageous bills being voted with support of democratic opposition. And this is during the nationalist offensive of last few years. So this is where Poles of different political hues meet together and unite.
We'll take questions soon, but if you'd like to ask a question, we'll follow up after this one. But Jan, I wonder if you can just discuss the lawsuit that you were involved in and your own experience of the ways in which
Yeah.
Poland is exercising this.
Well, it's actually I laugh, but it's sad because the thing is that Polish legislators voted the so-called Polish Holocaust bill in January 2018. So 6 years ago, not a long time ago, and once again it was voted with either with abstention or support of the entire opposition, something which never happened in the parliament before. Here they were voting together with the nationalists, which basically the law stipulated 3 years in prison for people like for people, independent historians who argued that Polish society in some parts was complicit or involved in the German genocidal project. And so, after half a year of pressure, mostly from the states, actually, from the United States, Polish government had to remove the criminal provisions of the law. And then Polish then Prime Minister Morawiecki said, we have to do it under pressure, but we have enough of civil regulations which will allow us to pursue these slanderers of a good name of the nation. And in the spring of 2018, I actually was co-editor and co-author of a major book which hit the market at that time. And lo and behold, soon we learned that I and my co-editor were being sued for the 2 volumes, 3,000 footnotes, and that in one case, one of my co-editor actually, that she slandered the family of one Polish farmer. Now, the lawsuit has been filed by a old woman, a distant relative of this fellow in question. But of course, it became very quickly clear that behind this was a far right-wing NGO driving the whole affair, and this NGO was actually a proxy in the hands of Polish state. There was Polish Minister of Interior, Polish Minister of Justice involved, and so on. Now, the lawsuit we lost in the first instance. We won on appeal, which was very lucky for us. But the thing is, when we lost in the first instance, the justification of the verdict, which went against me and my co-editor, co-author, was chilling. The Polish court then decided that Polish nation never hurt the Jews, that they never robbed the Jews, that they never murdered the Jews. Basically, the court decided what history was all about. And then the court said that anyone who strikes at the sense of national dignity of the nation should be transferred in front of the courts. Now, all of this meant that should this legal decision stand, any kind of Holocaust-related work in Poland would have been impossible. So it sent chilling waves around, and as I mentioned, we won an appeal, but this situation was the chilling effect of this trial, which lasted 3 years, was visible and I would say long-lasting for certain. And I can still add that I am involved in still 2 ongoing legal battles. So these things take toll, and before we had Holocaust deniers who were disorganized. These were individuals, sometimes a small organization. It's very different if you have a Holocaust distortion driven by a powerful state. And now, mind you, Polish state perhaps in the forefront, but Lithuania or Romania or Hungary are not far behind. So, I mean, this idea of transforming Holocaust into a pleasant narrative which builds up our ego is really sweeping not only one land but many lands, and that's what makes it so dangerous and what makes our counteraction so necessary and painfully necessary and immediately needed.
Thanks, Jan. Are there any questions from anyone? Thanks.
Thank you for a very riveting talk. There seems to be the importance of Holocaust memory by visiting the graves or the lack of graves in Poland. On the other side, there's Holocaust tourism, which is being exploited by state. Could you comment about that?
Can you repeat the question? Can you, because I barely heard the question.
Sorry, so thank you very much for a riveting discussion and a great book. There is a contrast between the need to have Holocaust commemoration at the sites of the atrocity in Poland. But on the other hand, there seems to be a great amount of exploitation by the state, and often aided and abetted by Jewish groups, I might add, in exploiting Holocaust tourism. Can you just talk about that tension, which seems to be very problematic?
Right. I mean, the Jewish. I mean, I like to speak to matters in which I am an expert, and which is history of the Holocaust, and also the commemoration of the Holocaust in Poland. Now, the trips, the memory trips that you mentioned, organized by Jewish organizations, they of course also use the memory of the Holocaust for their own purposes. Unfortunately, it's not only the Polish, let's say, distinction to use the Holocaust to its own ends. And what you see is that there has been an ongoing, let's say, squabble between Polish authorities and Jewish organizations, how to organize these trips of Jewish youths mostly, who arrived in Poland only to look at the places of Jewish suffering and horrors, while Polish authorities wanted to infuse a sense of optimism, forcing Jewish youth to see brighter sides of this equation. So the difference, of course, is that the Polish authorities control the territory. And this is fundamental. I mean, if you look, there are different, of course, problems with the Jewish tourism, Holocaust tourism, which I am not qualified even to enter into. But we all know that in Israel, for instance, part of national ethos is being built on the usage of Holocaust, let's say, in a way, of history of the Holocaust. But in Poland, with the fundamental difference is that Polish state controls the sites. And it decides basically what gets seen, what does not, and how these sites will be living into the future. So that's why this marks this fundamental difference. And just last year, Polish authorities actually concluded an agreement with Jewish organizations in Israel that Jewish students coming to Poland would have to also explore Polish museums, which presented a very different scenario, let's say historical narrative, including museums of so-called forsaken soldiers who are right-wing or patriotic Polish soldiers, very often responsible for murders of Jews after the war. So these are clashing interests, and this is memorial warfare, if you want to know my opinion, unfortunately.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Thanks. Thanks. Yeah, and this will be the last question from someone in the
Jonathan, I can't hear these questions. Can you explain the questions to me, because
we have a microphone that you'll hear the question now.
I was initially going to ask a different question, but I had an idea that intersects quite nicely with what we've just been discussing, and that is, I guess, the role of, for background, at the moment I'm working with my 92-year-old grandmother to write the story of her survival in hiding in Poland. Most of every branch of my family was murdered in Poland, at Auschwitz, Belzec and Treblinka. What's fascinated me is how complex righteous behaviour was, and how, although so many people were responsible for my grandmother and great-grandmother's survival, actually they were all doing it for different motives, and probably only one of the many people that helped them were truly behaving altruistically. My great-grandmother was really paying with her body for a lot of instances of their survival. And I think it made me really think about the way that our own national identity in Israel, but also just as Jews, and our need to categorise people as righteous or collaborators or bystanders has distorted the history too. And the interesting thing is the could you discuss maybe the intersection between the Polish national narrative and our sort of some righteous people were absolutely glorious, incredible human beings who really did beautiful things out of altruism. How has the intersection of could you comment more on the intersection of the Jewish national project and the Polish national project, if you like, in distorting righteousness and distorting altruistic behavior in the Holocaust?
Well, the thing that thank you for this question. The thing is that usually gets forgotten here is that, and I have been talking to very, very many people who were involved with saving the Jews during the war in Poland, and with the Jews who were saved by them. The thing is that what in Poland is not welcome is the notion that the greatest fear of the Polish righteous were not the Germans. They were their neighbors, sometimes members of their families. The Germans had no idea where the Jews were hiding. However, the neighbors knew, and the problem was that there was no social permission on this kind of conspiracy. And if you had partisans in your house, that was indeed considered a noble patriotic deed. However, if you were hiding Jews, it was not. So your chance of getting reported to the German authorities was huge. So the righteous were deadly afraid of their neighbors, and they were deadly afraid until recently. If you look at the correspondence of Israeli government with the righteous until 1990s or even later, people in Poland were asked, yes, we are the righteous, we got the medal, but please don't deliver it to us so the neighbors won't see it. So this is the part of the story which goes unreported. And basically, human activity, human actions under this terrifying, horrible pressure of terror is never, black and white. It's a mixture of all colors. And so in Poland, attempt is being made constantly to make it basically black and white history, that these are people without blame. But nobody's held without blame. People were doing, as you mentioned, your own family. Just a few years back, I published a diary of a young girl who survived in hiding being raped by her noble savior. And she asked for him to become a righteous among the nations. So go figure. So these are all the horrors when you want to study this part, which sort of get rejected when you look at the official narrative on both sides, actually.
Jan, I think we have to end there, but thank you so much. And can everyone please just thank Jan?
Very much.
There's his essay. Hope it's available here, but I encourage you to read it. Whitewash. Thanks, Jan.
So thank you very much. I guess it's late in the evening on Saturday. So have a wonderful day in Melbourne. Bye-bye.